The families of two British men sentenced to death by Russian forces are calling for them to receive urgent legal and medical help.
Aidan Aslin and Sean Pinner were captured whilst fighting with the Ukraine army in the east of the country. The Prime Minister has urged ministers to do everything in their power to secure their release.
We can speak now to Richard Fuller, who's the local MP for Sean Pinner's family, and he joins us now. Very good morning to you, Mr. Fuller. Thank you for your time this morning. Can you tell us a little bit about the family and how they are? I mean, these are very difficult circumstances. Tell us what you can.
They are. I met with Sean's mother and stepfather on Thursday evening, and clearly it's a very anxious time. And what's so worrying is that for weeks now, the families have been receiving messages from Sean and from Aidan, obviously directed by those who are holding them, looking for a prisoner of war exchange. And then very suddenly, a few days ago, those holding them changed the rules, broke international law, and held a show trial. And so it's an incredibly difficult situation for the family.
What contact, if any, have they been able to have with Sean?
Well, there have been these restricted calls, so outbound calls made, clearly, certainly in my opinion, under a certain amount of duress, and with a request for prisoner of war exchanges. And so that created some hope that those holding Sean and Aidan were going to follow international law, correctly recognized Sean and Aidan as prisoners of war. They're members of the Ukraine military and have been for a number of years, well before Russia invaded. And now this change. And what's most concerning to me is that I've seen no evidence, and the family's seen no evidence, that Sean or Aidan have been able to meet with representatives from the International Red Cross. That's usually the case in almost all conflict situations. And also that a trial has taken place, but without any independent legal advice to assist Sean or Aidan.
So, yeah, this is really interesting because there are clearly very immediate concerns about both their physical and their mental welfare, presumably, which, judging from what you've just told me, are things the family think are not being addressed at all.
Well, they're not being addressed. And who knows what sort of duress they've been under, physical or psychological duress. This is a monstrous flouting of their human rights. It is a complete contravention of all of the rules set up under the Geneva Convention for the treatment of prisoners of war. And this area, they have someone who touts herself as the human rights ombudsman, Daria Morozova, who has been speaking for weeks about how well they treat prisoners of war, how well they follow the rules. Well, what is she doing to ensure that Sean and Aidan are given their rights under international law? What is she doing to ensure that the Red Cross can have access, to ensure that Sean and Aidan are well and fit?
Mr. Fuller, obviously we've heard the comments of the Prime Minister saying everything that can be done should be done. We're speaking to our correspondents in Kyiv, in Ukraine, this morning, saying in practical terms, in terms of what levers are available because of the situation politically, geographically, there are very few avenues right now that politically and in terms of any kind of negotiations that can be gone through. What do you see and what would you like to see happening?
Well, at that sort of big global level, you're right. It's a very complex situation. And I've been in touch with the Foreign Secretary. I know that she's spoken with her counterpart in Ukraine, and quite rightly, as Sean was a member and Aidan of the regular Ukraine army, it's right that they're treated as prisoners of war. It's right that those negotiations are undertaken by Ukraine with Russia or their proxies. But at the heart of this are mothers and families who have been strung along by a bunch of people who gave them hope that their sons would be treated as prisoners of war, and then have flouted international law and created this devastating situation. And what they need to do now is enable Sean and Aidan to have due process, legal representation if this sham process is going to continue. But most importantly, to ensure that their they're safe and healthy by giving access to the Red Cross.
And a lot of people who are learning more and more about the story about these individuals, Aidan and Sean, they're interested in them now in a way that we weren't before. I know you've got close contact with Sean's family. What have you kind of learned about his character, what he's like, and you know who he is?
Well, you know, I can tell you his mother is a strong personality. She's a strong woman, and you know, determined to ensure that her son is kept well, as is his stepfather. Sean is a father. He is married to a Ukrainian woman. His wife is still in Ukraine, still doing extensive humanitarian work. This is a family that is committed to the values and principles that we hold dear, and are committed to the humanitarian effort to support those most impacted by the conflict. And I think that's something that the British government should recognize. I think it is something the British government is recognizing. But ultimately, of course, it's up to those who are holding Sean and Aidan to recognize that they ought to be following international law. And Russia cannot wash its hands of this. It can't pretend that somehow it doesn't have control. The only reason that Sean are being held by those people in Donetsk is because of the involvement of Russian military forces. These are Russian proxies. Russia needs to obey international law.
Richard Fuller, thank you very much for your time this morning. That's Richard Fuller, who is MP for North Bedford, and you hear he has close contact with Sean Pinner's family.